We're continuing on with our exploration of Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. We'll be looking at planetary strengths today, as well as the seasons. It looks like we'll get to the Dhatu, Mula, and Jiva aspects of the planets. And in the following video, we will be looking at the exaltation, debilitation, and dignities of planets. So let's begin. Planetary strengths, according to Parashara. And these are verses 35 through 38. Mercury and Jupiter are strong in the east. The Sun and Mars gain strength in the south. Saturn gains strength in the west. The Moon and Venus have vitality in the north. Moon, Mars, and Saturn are strong at night. Mercury has strength during the day and the night. Jupiter, Sun, and Venus have strength in the daytime. When the moon is waning, cruel planets have strength. When the moon is waxing, gentle planets are stronger. Cruel planets are said to have strength during the Dakshinayana. Gentle planets have power during Uttarayana. The lords of the year, month, day, and hora are stronger than each of the previous in the ascending order. I'll go back over that. And then again, naturally in ascending strength are Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Moon, and the Sun. Now let's review this verse one more time. Mercury and Jupiter are strong in the east. What does that mean? Well, if we're looking at a chart here, the east is always the rising sign, the ascendant, or the ascending sign. So this is what was rising on the eastern horizon at the moment of birth. So if we have Jupiter or Mercury in the ascendant or near the ascendant, the further they get away from the ascendant, the less strength they have. But they will have strength in the second house and the 12th house because it will be close to the ascending sign. The Sun and Mars gain strength in the south. Now, the south is the 10th cusp, or the midheaven, or the 10th house. That's considered to be the highest point within the chart. So the Sun and Mars, both planets of leadership, both planets of personal strength and personal power and character, they're going to have strength in the 10th house, near the 10th cusp. That's considered to be in the south, where they can put their power and their strength to use. Saturn gains strength in the west, or the descendant. So if we're looking at a chart, the descendant will always be the 7th house. Saturn does well in the twilight, the setting of the day. So it's said that Saturn gains strength in the west, which is the descendant. The Moon and Venus have vitality in the north. Now where is the north? Well, it's opposite of the 10th. So if the 10th is the south, then the 4th house must be the north. So the 4th cusp, 4th house. When the Moon and Venus are closer to that 4th house, that 4th cusp, the greater strength they'll have. Moon, Mars, and Saturn are strong at night. Okay, that simply means that if a person is born at night, well then Moon, Mars, and Saturn will have additional strength. Mercury has strength whether it's night or day, because Mercury is adaptable. Mercury can handle the night or the day in the same way that he can handle being with malefics or being with benefics or cruel and gentle planets. Jupiter, Sun, and Venus have strength in the daytime. So again, when the sun is up, if we're born during the day, after the sun has risen, before the sun sets, Jupiter, Sun, and Venus will have additional strength within the chart. Now, when the moon is waning, that means when it is going from a full moon, a bright moon, to a new moon where you don't see it in the sky. When the moon is waning, cruel planets have strength. And when the moon is waxing, meaning it's moving from a new moon where you can't see it, to a bright moon, a full moon, gentle planets have strength. We've already covered these, what is a gentle planet, what is a cruel planet, in these past videos within this series. Cruel planets have strength in Dakshinayana. And what is that? That is when the sun is between the summer solstice and the winter solstice. And how do we know that in the chart? Well, typically that will be when the sun is moving from Cancer through to Capricorn. So this is considered to be the Dakshinayana, the sun's passage from the summer solstice, which happens around tropical Cancer, through tropical Capricorn. The sun moving in this direction, in this part of the chart, that's going to give cruel planets strength. Now, gentle planets, which most people refer to as benefic planets, are stronger during Uttarayana, which is what? That's when we have the sun passing from the winter solstice to the summer solstice. So as the sun goes from tropical Capricorn through to tropical Cancer, this is when gentle planets will have greater strength. Now, the lords of the year, the month, the day, and the hora are stronger than each previous in the ascending order. That means that we've got the year, then the lord of the month is stronger, then the lord of the day is stronger than the month and the year. Then the lord of the hora is stronger than each of the previous lords. And then the next final step within this, Parashara says that in ascending strength are Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Moon, and then the Sun. What does that mean? That means that Saturn is given the least amount of natural strength. Then we have Mars, which is stronger, and then Mercury is stronger, then Jupiter is stronger, then Venus is stronger, then Moon is stronger, then Sun is the strongest of them all. Now, we will get into this a little more detailed in Shadbala, but these are to give you a sense of trying to determine, in general, how are these planets going to play out in your chart? How is their natural strength going to shine through to color the chart that we're looking at? So again, these are things that we have to learn, we have to memorize. You're going to want to put them into action right now, but you need to wait. We need to get these foundational steps before we can plug them into other aspects of assessing a planet, as well as plugging them into specific techniques. All right, so we need to keep this in mind. Now, the next thing we want to consider, according to Parashara, that deals with trees related to the planets. So that brings us to, I believe it is verse number 39. Trees related to the planets. So trees with stout trunks and trees which are considered strong are ruled by the sun. Saturn is said to rule over useless trees. The moon rules over trees that produce milk. An example it's given are like plants that produce rubber, the sap that produces rubber, plants, trees that produce sap. And all trees produce sap, but let's say that this is sap that can be utilized by us. Mars rules over bitter trees. So trees that have bitter fruits, bitter leaves, bitter bark. Venus rules over plants that produce flowers. So that will also indicate trees, which are flowering. And again, most trees flower in some way because that's how they reproduce. But let's think of trees that actually produce flowers that we can look at, like the magnolia tree. Jupiter is indicated by plants that produce fruits, or trees that produce fruits. Mercury is said to lord over fruitless trees. And again, some of these things make a lot of sense if you take a moment to consider. Venus rules over plants that produces flowers. Well, Venus rules over flowers. Jupiter is indicated by plants that produce fruits, or trees that produce fruits. Jupiter is a planet that we look to for our capacity to pass on our legacy, to have children. And that's exactly what a fruit is, or what it does. Mercury is said to lord over fruitless trees. And that's one of the reasons that Mercury is said to be a neuter. So Mercury does not have children, typically. So trees that do not have fruits And of course, all trees pass on seeds. So again, we don't want to get too literal with this. These are just ways to understand, if we want to include within our honoring of the planets within the world. If we see a fruitless tree, we think of Mercury. If we see a useless tree, we think of Saturn. If we think of a strong, stout, gigantic, old oak tree, we think of the sun. If we see a maple tree or a rubber tree, we think of the moon. And again, these things can also be used for things like prajna astrology. Now, other planetary matters, according to Parashara. We've already discussed the castes, but here we hear and see that Rahu is said to rule over the outcast and one cruel in deeds. So, other planetary matters, Rahu is said to rule over the outcast or one cruel in deeds. And what is someone cruel in deeds? Well, again, that can be like a butcher. In the commentary that I was reading through, and I've got a couple of them, it also gave the example that Rahu is said to rule over people of illegal children between a Shudra, of the Shudra caste male, and a Brahmin caste female. And I had to chuckle at that because it just kind of goes to show how people think. It's essentially saying something like, the only way this would happen is if a Shudra caste male would, copulate with a Brahmin caste woman. So we're going to get an illegal birth here. But I'm sure there are plenty of instances of Brahmin men, doing whatever they do with Shudra females. So again, not to get too much into all of that, I don't really want to get into that, but just keep in mind that it doesn't have to just be that way. So when you read these things in these books, you kind of got to update a little bit and realize that human nature comes through a little bit in people's commentaries. And it can go either way. It doesn't just have to be one way. Ketu is said to make one a mixed caste. So again, that would be an intercaste marriage, an indication of intercaste marriage. At least that's what the translator in one of the works that I was reading states. Saturn and the nodes indicate anthills. All right, Saturn and the nodes indicate anthills. Well, you don't necessarily want to sleep on an anthill, be on an anthill, build on an anthill. So essentially they're places that you want to avoid. Rahu indicates cloth of multicolor, and Ketu represents rags. This occurs to me often when I'm walking down the street and I see someone coming towards me. I'll often try to qualify them based on the planet they seem to be embodying. If I see someone dressed up what I would imagine Venus to be like, I'll think of that. If I see someone coming to me in multicolored clothing, I'll think, Rahu, this Rahu energy within my sphere right now. If I see someone dressed in rags, I think of Ketu. So these are ways to kind of think about the world around you as a representation of these astrological planetary energies. The metal lead and blue gems are given to Rahu and Ketu. Jupiter is said to govern saffron cloth. Venus is said to govern silken cloth. The sun governs red silk. The moon is indicative of white silk. Mercury governs black silk. Mars is of red robes, and Saturn is of multicolored robes. So again, we see these planets, Jupiter, saffron cloth. You see someone in that, you'll think of Jupiter. Venus governs silken cloth. The sun governs red silken cloth. The moon is indicative of white silk. Mercury governs black silk. So these are all fine cloth. Mars is of red robes, and Saturn is of multicolored robes. And here we see the similarity between Rahu indicating multicolored and Saturn also indicating multicolored. So this is oftentimes how we can start to understand the similarities between Rahu and Saturn, because it is said that Rahu is like Saturn and Ketu is like Mars. Now, not exactly, of course, but there will be similarities, and that will come through in a lot of the astrological texts that you read. Okay, so we'll go a little bit further. We'll look at the seasons governed by the planets, and then we'll look at the metals or the inanimate objects, the roots and vegetation, and the living beings that govern the planets. So the seasons. Vasanta is governed by Venus. This means brilliant. And it's typically, not typically, it is, it's when the sun is passing through tropical Pisces and tropical Aries. So when the sun is passing through tropical Pisces and tropical Aries, we have Vasanta, which is governed by Venus. Next, we have Grishma, which is said to mean hot, and it is governed by Mars. This is said to occur when we have the sun passing through tropical Taurus and tropical Gemini. Again, this is Grishma, governed by Mars. Next, we have Varsha, which is governed by the moon, indicates rainy, the rainy season. Tropical Cancer and tropical Leo. When we have the sun passing through tropical Cancer and tropical Leo, then we know that when it comes to seasons, the moon's season is occurring. This is the rainy season. Sharad is governed by Mercury. It means mature. And this is when the sun is in tropical Virgo and tropical Libra. All right. So during that season, during the mature season, governed by Mercury, we have the sun passing through tropical Virgo and Libra. Jupiter governs Himanta, the frost season. That's when we have the sun passing through tropical Scorpio and tropical Sagittarius. Next, the cold season, Shishira. We have Saturn governing this season. And that's when we have the sun moving through tropical Capricorn and tropical Aquarius. Again, this is how the seasons are divided. Vasanta, sun is in tropical Pisces and Aries, the brilliant season. Next, we have Grishma, the hot season, when the sun is passing through tropical Taurus and tropical Gemini, ruled over by Mars. Varsha, governed by the moon, the rainy season. Tropical Cancer and tropical Leo, that's where we'll find the sun. Sharad is governed by Mercury, which is the mature season, when the sun is passing through tropical Virgo and tropical Libra. And Jupiter governs Himanta, the frost season, as the sun passes through tropical Scorpio and tropical Sagittarius. And then Saturn governs the cold season, Shishira, as the sun passes through tropical Capricorn and tropical Aquarius. And now finally, the Dhatu, Mula, and Jiva. Now again, this is something to learn, to study, to memorize, because it will be used later on in other aspects of astrology, again, particularly prajna astrology, as well as other types of astrology. But the planets which rule over the metals, or the inanimate objects, the Dhatu, this is Rahu, Mars, Saturn, and the Moon. Rahu, Mars, Saturn, and the Moon. The Sun and Venus rule over Mula, or roots and vegetation. So the Sun and Venus are said to rule over roots and vegetation, Mula. Living beings, or the Jiva, is ruled over by Mercury, Jupiter, and Ketu. Now again, we're going to use this related to prajna astrology. Someone comes to you and says, I'm looking for this inanimate object. So you're going to pay attention to Rahu, Mars, Saturn, Moon. A person has a question about a root or vegetation, a plant. You're going to pay attention to Sun and Venus. A person has a question about a living being or a person. We're going to pay extra attention to Mercury, Jupiter, and Ketu. Similarly, you can use this to figure out what is the person going to be asking about. If someone shows up and they ask you a question, and you create a chart for that moment, and we see that Mercury or Jupiter is on the ascendant, that can tell us that their question is probably going to relate to a jiva, or a living being. But again, these are fundamental, foundational terms. So add them to your notebook, and we will move on with our next installment in about a week. So thank you.